Erin, welcome. Good morning, everybody. As Craig mentioned, you've found the chat. If you haven't found it or typed in it, fear not, it will be there all the way through. And on my toolbar, right next to it on the right-hand side is the Q&A. But I think it varies according to how you have your Zoom set up. Quick note to our conference coming up in the middle of February, and Craig has some pretty cool things to say about that in a few minutes. But first, before we go any further, talking of sunrises, I had the pleasure of working physically at SAIT's campus the beginning half of this week. And this was the view as you arrived just outside Heritage Hall on Monday morning. So literally the sky seemed to be on fire. SAIT is based in Calgary. That's Calgary's skyline right there for those of you who are not joining us from Calgary. And originally and still known as Mokyntas. And Mokyntas is the meeting place of two rivers. I think it's actually the elbow of two rivers. We are situated on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which encompasses our Indigenous people of the Treaty 7 region. That is the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda, and the Northwest Métis homeland. We're always treated by a great view at SAIT, but it's very cool if you just take a moment and remember what was here before. Traditional hunting grounds, none of that. I'm sure the sky was still on fire. So it's important to us to acknowledge everybody who makes their homes in the region of Treaty 7. And thank you for joining us wherever you might be in Canada or beyond, as we well know.
Yes.
There you go.
Perfect. Thank you, Jenny. And yes, just before we get going, we are super excited. A little over 2 weeks now to be hosting our third, I can't say annual because this will be the second one this year, but our third conference around leading beyond any title. Sessions this year will be ranging from accountability to trust to some digital skills to some project management skills. We've got about 14, 15 different sessions for folks to choose from. And I'm just going to pop into the chat right now a special offer just for this group because you were so kind to join us on a Friday morning. You want to take advantage and bring a friend for free or bring yourself for half price. Take advantage of that code that I've just popped into the chat. And we would love to have you or your company join us. If you are interested in having folks from your entire organization or a larger team join, don't hesitate to also take advantage of that code or reach out. And we can see what we can do for you. But with that in mind, Jenny, today is one of those, we get into these little cycles where we get into some great topics like feedback and goal setting, et cetera, et cetera. And then every once in a while, I think we get a little smart and we put out titles like we have for today around whether your team needs to be built, connected, or engaged. And as we get closer to the date, we start talking to each other and going, what exactly did we mean by this when we set this title? But I think what we're looking at today is this piece around, we have all heard the phrases of forming, storming, norming, performing. And as you added in for me on a surprise, adjourning. You're right. It doesn't quite fit in with the
does.
Right. But just, a leader's job is to build a team. It's
Correct.
to build a team. It's to connect with their team. It's to engage their team. In general, if you think about this as the bigger picture of leading a team, you're probably going to have a team that is there for some time. People are going to come and join that team and disappear from that team, et cetera. You're going to have short-term project teams and so on. So there's a few ways we can look at this, but let's just start there. This whole idea of forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning, it just doesn't. But anyway.
It kind of ruins the flow. The adjourning piece does. And you say it better. Yours almost rhymes. So what have we got there? Forming, storming, norming, and performing comes from sports psychology research in the 1960s, no less. And they looked at sports teams. And when you think of a sports season, that makes perfect sense. The team gets together. That's your forming part. Storming, hundreds of questions, disagreements, questions to the extent of, why is Craig the leader? What's he got? What puts him in that place? Those kind of questions. We'll question everything. We'll question the goals. We'll question the setup. And the storming is just generally conflict and disagreement. And when we come out the other side of that, we enter a phase called norming. Excuse me. And norming is where most teams actually get to, which is where you can execute the day job. And those that hit high performing status move into that performing phase. Now, in the sports team, you've got that end of season. That's where the adjourning came from. And closure is important to us as humans. So short form, that's what, excuse me, the journey for a team looks like. We call it group dynamics. And the part that some leaders miss is that every single group or team will go through these stages. So immediately, if you are a leader that doesn't like conflict, finds difficult conversations hard, struggles with challenge, that storming phase is a tricky one, because if you sweep it under the carpet, it just lasts longer. The other problem with it is when we look in business and we look in leadership, it's not as neat and tidy as a phase, like a sports season, unless maybe if you work in projects, but I think even those are so big and complex these days that doesn't run either. And so one of the problems with it is when we look at it from leadership, it's not linear. It doesn't run nice and neatly. Okay, let's form, let's storm, let's norm. There's more of a pendulum that swings first off between storming and norming. And then if you can kick out the other side to get into norming, the question becomes, how do we elevate to high performing? And that takes time, and it takes a lot of work as well. That was a lot in the first sentence. There might be something.
Yeah, there was. There's a lot to unpack there. And I'm just picturing, the leader who says, okay, this Friday we finish forming, Monday we storm. But that's a different conversation. So, I think you raised a really interesting point, is it's not neat, self-contained, etc. Yes, there are occasions where if you're now asked to lead up a project team, like pull a team together, where you may have the ability as a leader to kind of go through this to an extent. Most of us, when you become a leader, you become a leader of an existing team.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I shouldn't say most of us, but I'm assuming that would be the case. So I think there's some, I want to park the simpleness of starting a team from scratch, because I think we're all currently more than likely part of teams, leading teams, et cetera. The piece that comes to mind here is, how do you do this as folks leave your team, folks come into your team? As a leader, how do you think about these? Because individuals are going to perhaps join at different stages,
Mm-hmm.
right? I don't know. What does that trigger for you?
So every time somebody joins, you basically come back to the beginning again as they enter in, which again, it isn't, excuse me, it isn't that linear, easy progression. Every time somebody joins, you're right back to the beginning. But the interesting thing is, if we look at it not as a line, you and your team, wherever you're at, can be forming all the time. So what forming is getting to know the people around you. So forming is building connection. Forming is building relationships. And when we've got connection and we've got relationships, we've got the real power and energy that leads to great work, and engagement comes alongside with that. The problem is that often when we form, sorry, excuse me, when we form, we do it day one, and somebody new joins your team, and you're like, okay, meet Jenny. Hi, I'm Jenny. And then we say, okay, well, now they're in, they'll figure it out. Or we're not quite that callous, and we put someone to work with them who sort of shows them the way, and they find their feet, and gradually they build up speed. But they don't know everybody to the extent that everybody else knows everybody. And so if you constantly have forming in the back of your mind, how am I building that social capital, that connection? You've got a win-win-win-win on your hands, because you're bringing that person up to speed quicker because they're getting to know the people around them. You're constantly holding the relationships. And when you build connection, what we say, or Brené Brown says, when we're building connection, people want to be seen, heard, and valued. And there's no better way to do that than by holding that space and time to sort of execute that. And it doesn't have to be sparkly icebreakers every time you have a team meeting. It can be a real down-to-earth connection question at the start of a meeting. And
Give an example. What would an example be?
So the quickest, easiest form that if you have no more than a minute, you can do round table of a 2-word check-in. We run it all the time. And the easiest one, what is one word for the best of your life right now, one word for the worst of your life right now? And I was joking with someone yesterday, because if I did at the moment, my word would be work and work. Okay. So, but if you're my leader, later that day, you have the opportunity to say, Jenny, that was an interesting answer this morning. What's going on? Okay. And I'm going to tell you about the highs and the lows that are running in my week. But you don't have to do it with that. You could do, what is the best thing for you about being on our team? And what is the worst thing for you about being on our team? You need a little bit of psychological safety for people to show up in that space. Move on, and you want to go sort of further than that in building those relationships. There's all kinds of different ways, and I can never pronounce it, but there's one where you have 5 slides and you have 20 seconds per slide. It's like, it sounds like Pikachu or something, and it's not that. I'm not doing it a service, but give your people like 2 minutes. Tell us something about you that we don't know from just looking at you. There's so much to build into, and if we do that, I'm going to talk about field hockey and you're going to talk about ice hockey. Great. Now we have a conversation where we're completely different in that space, but there's a really good conversation there. And the beauty of that is when we get into a meeting and we disagree, and we need to disagree if we're going to elevate anything, when I next see you, there's way more to you than the job title or the disagreement. And so we have so many other connection points. It keeps the cohesion and the social capital on your team healthier.
Yeah, it's almost a case of slowing down to speed up a little bit with that.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of leaders, at least in my experience, and I think about the teams that I've joined and been on, that probably has rarely happened.
Yeah, because
what's that? Sorry.
We're always in too much of a hurry. So what you said was brilliant. Yeah, slow down before you speed up.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I heard you say that I was brilliant, and it's like Erin also pointed out. They say that they'll be calling that format of presentation Pikachu from now on, regardless.
Really done it a disservice. It is excellent. Look it up, and thank you, Kat, for putting the proper terminology in the chat.
There we go. So a question has come in, I think fits in very well here. And that is, what if our team is so small and we have 3 levels of management in those meetings? How do we get our management to do social capsules or make them aware of them?
They're human too. Like whoever's meeting it is, they're human too. And, Connect First, who we work with a lot, calls it connect before content. And it doesn't matter who you are in that organization. If you're in a meeting, your expectation is connect before content. It's a minute, 2 minutes before the start of every meeting. So how do you get management to buy in? Have a conversation, explain the benefit of it. And I'm trying to think of a shortcut to getting the benefit to somebody. There is a great TED Talk. We'll put it in the show notes by Margaret Heffernan. And I think she actually has the best description of it. And what she talks about is every good company has its bricks in place, and your bricks are your vision, your mission, your policies, your KPIs, your goals, whatever else it might be. But social capital is the mortar between the bricks, and the mortar between the bricks is the relationships. And at the end of the day, companies don't have ideas, people have ideas. People don't leave companies, people leave people. So the stronger that mortar is, the better the company is in the long run. And so when it comes to management, they care. Their sort of line of where they're judged is generally bottom line, company, etc. Well, that's what you're speaking to. That's your value in it. And for everybody else, work is a better place to come to when we have better relationships.
Yeah. Conversely, you can't spend all your time focusing purely on the relationships, right? You've got to get the work done. So that talks a little bit to me about this move now from storming, norming to high performing. This episode is going to sound like a Dr. Seuss book soon. But I guess the piece that I think we're really leaning into, and thank you, Nancy, for the link to the TED Talk in the chat there. The piece that we've really leaned into here is the connecting. And I wonder if we can, I'm not sure we were thinking about going this direction, but I wonder if we can kind of dig into that a little bit more and just speak about that relative to kind of the storming, norming, performing stages. Clearly, if you're well connected and you're a team, it becomes much easier to get to that high performance stage, like the Edmonton Oilers that we haven't mentioned yet. But we'll park that one for now. But just wondered if you can dig into that a little bit more, because I think my gut reaction to this is when we talk about connection and we talk about connecting, and it kind of comes back to the question that we had there. It seems to be this nice thing to have, and maybe this piece that a lot of leaders perhaps shy away from, because to your point, Jenny, we got stuff we got to get done and we got results we have to generate. We should be focused on that. We shouldn't be focused on this nice stuff.
You did that on purpose, didn't you? Poke the bear. So yes, and when there's so much in there, it's hard to know where to start. As a leader, it's about time. It's right back to what you said again. Okay, so let's take a small example, and we'll play it face to face, and we'll play it virtually. You and I bump into each other at SAIT. Okay, we're moving between buildings at SAIT, and classic, you say, Jenny, how are you? And before I've even got a word out of my mouth, you are halfway down the corridor because you're running back to back or whatever that might be, and moving on. And there's still a smile. There's still oh, there's Craig. He saw me, but he didn't hear me. Okay, the difference between connecting and not connecting is probably about a minute, less than that even, where you actually stop walking and you say, Jenny, how are you doing? Now I have a choice. There are times where I'll tell you, yeah, I'm great, thanks. And there's no space or time for any more. There might be something that you notice within there, the way you say, I say, yeah, I'm great. And you're like, you really doing okay? Yeah, you know what? It's a little up and down at the moment. And at that point, you may still have to rush off, but you have connected with me, because chances are what you'll do is circle back later in the day. Okay, got time for coffee later in the week? Do you want to have a chat? Blah, blah, blah. I can still say no, but you're recognizing that. That's an extra 30 seconds, literally, in your day. You actually, I'm going to put you on the spot here, but you did it this week. We were in a Teams conversation. You picked up something, and your next 2 lines, which would have taken you less than 3 seconds to type, everything okay, ? That's what connection is when we make the time to see the human in front of us, as opposed to spinning all the way just on the numbers, just on the metrics. And then, other things in connection are they're so simple, and a lot of them we do it naturally. The question is, are we consistent with it? So another thing that we talk about in connection is being present. And I'm sure we've used it in here before. John Amici, who wrote 12 Promises of Giants, talks about how prepared are you to swivel your chair completely. And you don't have to be sitting down for that. What that means is, how prepared are you to actually engage with the person in front of you? And, we put our phones down in the middle of the table. No, the phone is still the most important thing between us. Leave the phone behind. Have a conversation with the person. And by the way, this is still looking at your phone, because you're reading the email on your smartwatch for 9 out of 10 people now. And so the connection really is literally be interested in the person in front of you. They are fascinating. But if you don't make time to find all that out, you will never, ever really get the beauty of who you're working with. And when we're connected, we do better work. We know that.
Yeah. I think that is the key piece in there, is that when we are connected, we do better work. Your level of trust goes up, your level of psychological safety goes up. Everybody somewhat buys in. We've been talking about this on our team I've really been thinking about culture lately, and I think we can get into the role that a leader plays in fostering culture around engagement, because as we will talk about, it's more than just an engagement survey. Right? No offense to Gallup, but it doesn't matter. It does matter who your Q10 is. And if you know the Gallup survey, that's, do you have a best friend at work? That's that connection piece, but the survey isn't going to solve it all. Anyway, we will come back to that, because there's a question here that I want to get to. And it's longer, but let me go through it. It feels like our team is stuck in storming for about 3 years now. How can I get management to buy into accepting that we are in this situation? I think they feel like it would be admitting things aren't going well, and they are scared to do that. My thing is, if we don't name what is happening, we can't get over it and move into performing. We have a new group of leaders, and I'm not sure they know what to do. I'm not in a leadership role. That makes it extra tricky. I've been around this place for 15 years and know this is how our team should not be functioning.
Send them the link of the webinar. No, I'm kidding. So yeah, 3 years in storming, that's exhausting. And that's one of the things with storming is like nobody wakes up in the morning and says, oh yes, give me a good conflict today. Like generally you say the word conflict and the hairs go up on the back of people's necks. So when you get stuck in storming, and lots of teams do, there's a lot. I think the answer to the question is almost in the question. How do we call it as it is? Now, storming often happens when people don't have the big picture. So stealing Chris Voss's tagline, vision drives decision. Let's get back to talking about, where are we going? What is the purpose? What is our priority? What are our steps to get there? And then a lot of the questions around storming, the elevation, if you like, that will get us out the other side, is making conflict productive. And in order to do that, we have to have the psychological safety to say, here's the obstacles that I have. Here's what's holding me back. And all of that is made easier when those relationships are formed. And so, as I'm listening to that question, a new set of leaders, chances are those leaders don't know each other well enough, and those leaders don't know the team, and the team doesn't know, like there's so many different connections in there that are missing. So we want to put some clarity around what the issues are and build the relationships start to form, even with leaders and team members all together. That's the other thing that we often want to do, is put leaders in one space and individual contributors in another space, where actually the real value is knowing that your leader in front of you is completely as human as you are. And that's difficult for a leader that wants to be perfect. It's parts that we work through. And the other thing that sort of sticks in there is some of these are difficult conversations. They're called difficult conversations for a reason. So don't get in and then run. Get in and stay in there. And that requires some emotional management too. So there's so many different parts in there. I'd come back to build the relationships and start to get some clarity. And that means asking good questions. That's sometimes enough to bring it to the forefront. Leaders who are out there, an agenda item sometimes at the end, what are the questions that I'm not asking? Or what are the questions that I'm not answering? That's an agenda item, and open that up to your team. And any degree of psychological safety, you'll start to get a few, and then pulling on psychological safety, somebody asks one, your productive response is the gem in there. Because if you respond productively, even to the extent of, wow, I didn't know that was a question, let me think about that, then people will ask again. If you let the ego out of the cage, you might ruin the chances of people asking again. So you have to manage yourself in that situation too.
Yeah, and I think that also takes a huge piece of vulnerability by that leader to be able to say, you know,
It
what
does.
are the questions? You know, those two questions, Jenny, I think are absolutely brilliant. But and for new leaders, I think it could be incredibly scary, right?
The
Because
unknown
you know,
is.
you get put into a position of leadership, and rightly or wrongly, you feel like you should have the answers,
Yeah.
right? And so I do think that's a chasm sometimes where, you know, you talk about the connecting piece and leaders connect and the teams
Mm.
connect, but you never bring them together in the same room to connect because, you know, we probably shouldn't be mingling or whatever ridiculous reason that is, or putting yourself out there as a leader and saying, wow, I had no clue. Some, you know, don't ask the questions you're afraid to hear the answers of sometimes rings in your ears.
If you don't know, if you don't ask, you'll never know.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So we've kind of touched on the forming, storming, connecting, um, the piece that we touched into here. So this piece around, we'll go back to our very beginning statement around build, connect, engage,
Mm-hmm.
right? Let's kind of talk about this transition between connection to engagement.
Yeah. And I think I'd remove the word transition. I think you do both. I think connection leads to
Yeah.
engagement. And I think they're both continuous. So the biggest mistake that we see is we need to engage our people. The classic is we'll run an engagement survey and then we do nothing with it. But engagement has nothing to do with surveys. Engagement is about engaging your people. So how are you listening to your people, for example? Do you know what motivates your people? Do you know what lights their fire? Do you know what makes them angry? Like where's the venting really, really happening? Because people don't get angry or frustrated for no reason. And so when we start to listen at different levels, you start to get much better information that you can use and you can work with. And so when we talk about engagement, we're talking about employees that are committed, that thrive, that have an attachment to the work that they do, as well as the people that they work with. And the byproduct of engagement is discretionary effort. And so in looking, sort of digging into and researching a bit for this morning, it came across the phrase quiet quitters again. And I didn't realize that was still a thing in terms of people still talking about it, but it is. And so I think we hover around 30% are actively engaged in North America in the work that they do. 51% are what we refer to as quiet quitters. And for those of you who missed the first round, quiet quitters are people who simply do the job that's asked of them. We could call it really healthy boundaries, I don't know. And then the noisy quitters, which are actively disengaged, and this group is potentially toxic to your team and to your organization, is hanging out there around, I think it hovers just under 20%. Those aren't fabulous numbers. And so I think that by building connection, see, hear, and value your people continuously and consistently, that leads to a level of engagement. Are they doing the work that lights their fire? Now, we can't all sit in this space. I love 98% of my job, literally. And not everybody can have that. But the research tells us 20% of your day. So if they got that in there, then we can lift that engagement. But you don't know what that is for a person if you're not making the time to have really good conversation with them and find out. And that's back to forming as well.
Well, look at that. You've wrapped it all up.
Oh, we're done.
No, and then there's so much good in there. And, you know, I think it's probably a good time to jump into the thought around surveys, especially as we move to engagement, right? Because to your point, a survey isn't the same thing as creating connection. A survey may give you some sense of some of the themes that exist within your organization, but it certainly does not foster connection. Right. And so maybe I've answered the question in and of itself, but what's the challenge with the use of an engagement survey to believe you're actually creating engagement?
You simply won't. Like, I don't think that you will. You do get it's feedback. You do get feedback, and the challenge is, how do you change that feedback into feed forward? Like, what are you going to do with it? And we see all kinds of strange things where, you know, leaders' performance is ranked on their engagement score, which is curious in itself. The trend now with the pulse surveys, where it's 2 or 3 questions and you do them more frequently. And again, you're getting feedback. The question is, what do you do with it? And so if you're going to run them, okay, so what are your scores and what's the conversation that you're having with your team? But instead, what we do is we wait for somebody somewhere in some department to come up with a strategy, which is actually just a plan, not really a strategy. And then we put the plan into place, and we're already 6 months down the line. I don't remember what I put on my engagement score, and it's changed. Truly, it will have changed, because we're humans and we're bumping into each other all the time. And so be careful how you use them, I think, is what I'd say. And then the other thing is, yes, you're getting great data, but where else are you getting your data from? And what are you doing with your data? So, you know, if you take engagement survey, and let's say there's a space where I can put in my own comments. Well, the classic thing is people go through and they rank positive or negative. That's still not great information. And I believe now, I was reading about this yesterday, it's fascinating. There's an NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, AI function, where they can do much better data analysis of what's within those statements. It'll give you much better information. But then don't stop there. Okay, take that plus, are you doing exit interviews? Why are people leaving your company? And how is that combined with what we're seeing within the engagement surveys? And then, you know, social media, what are people saying about your company? What's the engagement there? And then we've talked about these before too. You know, what's your listening strategy to your company? And your people know so much more. So if you say, like, your title, Craig, is director, the more that you talk to adjunct instructors, the more information you're going to get about the audience who's in the room. You meet somebody who makes a decision up there, fantastic, we need that. But you also need to understand what the audience is in the room, or what the experience is. You know, suddenly you've got no instructors. What's going on there? You're not going to get that from an engagement survey. So I think
you would in a 0 response rate.
but there you go. Yes. Okay. So what is that? Are they all quietly quit? No, there's something much bigger than that going on. And we'll never get the beauty of that. And the problem with it is that this is a people positive point thing. And we've got to make that work in all the work. So we have to want to know to make it, has to be intentional to make it happen.
Yeah. I think the thing I come to there as well, and I agree with you. I've seen engagement surveys come and go. I've done many of them. I've moved from engagement surveys to pulse surveys to surveys being positioned as part of a listening strategy. Listening strategies to me just sounds like surveillance, but that's a different thing. I'll leave that alone. But ultimately, the real work in this ties back to what we talked about earlier. And that is, if you're walking past somebody in the hallway, right? How are you connecting one-on-one? And how are you as a leader using your one-on-one meetings to connect and build engagement? How are you using, if you do regular performance feedback sessions, how are you using those more productively versus just filling out the form or filling up the system with whatever that one requires to connect with the individuals on your team? How are you bringing those individuals on your team together in a team building activity? Yeah. We haven't really talked about the role that team building activities play in here. And, how useful is it for everybody to go axe throwing, whatever that team building might be? But it comes back to that individual piece. Mm-hmm. I think that's where, to another point that we've made here, and it's been running through the chat, we're all expected to generate results. We're all expected to get stuff done. And generally that ends up, because it's spoken about so much more, taking priority over all the other piece, which inevitably, if you did focus more on it, would result in better outcomes.
So there's one thing before I go to where I'm going next. Going back to the surveys, I just remembered this. Amazon, I don't know if they still do it, at one point was doing a question a day. That was their cadence. And the one that I heard about was brilliant. Is your leader a simplifier or a complexifier? That was a question, like an example of one of the questions. So they were pretty hard hitting in places too, but that was a different cadence again, other than the pulse surveys. Back to what you were saying about one-on-ones. I really like where you went from leader getting to know their people into people getting to know each other too. So that we always talk about the one-on-one as the leader and the employee one-on-one. Does your team have one-on-ones with each other? If the work that they do is interdependent, what a fabulous idea if they have one-on-ones. And those one-on-ones don't have to be an hour, like even 10, 15 minutes, whatever that might be. But is it intentional? Are they building that? Are you helping them with what they could be talking about within there, both on that social capital side and on the productivity side as well? And then the other part, when we talk about productivity and we talk about results and we have to get these metrics, Alex Pentland did a study, and I forget which European country it was, but there was an organization, big organization, and what they did was they banned coffee cups at desks. Now, I said this the other day in a classroom, and the North American response to that is absolute horror. But that's what they did. And the reason that they did that and they made it possible is they wanted people to take a coffee break in a common area. And the deal was, when you were in the common area and you'd stopped for coffee, is that you talked about anything but work. And you literally built connection. Now, the results from that study are so mind-blowing. I actually went back right the way back to the original research paper to double check that there hadn't been a typo somewhere along the line. But the problem is for leaders, and I'm not suggesting that you go ban coffee cups today, but for leaders to make that change, to slow down before they speed up, to stop and be physically present, etc., you're really changing status quo. And back to something you said earlier, there's a courage involved in that, because the mind is immediately going to go to, what if it doesn't work? What if we don't get that metric? And the deal with high-performing teams is they take years to get to that place. And because, they get to that place because they have done such a good job of figuring out the social cohesion and the task cohesion. What is it that we do? The task cohesion, the jobs that we do, our priority, our focus, our efficiency and effectiveness in there, and the social cohesion that is as important. Who's who? How do we work together? Even if I don't like you, we don't have to be best friends at work. I think Gallup says you only need one. A team of 9, I don't have to be besties with everybody. But you can have that social cohesion plus that task cohesion, and that's where your high-performing team will come from.
Yeah, you touched on something there that I think leaders struggle with or worry about. I don't know if struggle with is the right word, but how long should it take, right? So it's not as simple as coming to a Friday morning session with Craig and Jenny, even though we wish it was, and then you coming to the conference, free plug for the conference, and then you engaging with SAIT to work over time. All joking aside, but I think that's where leaders struggle, right? We're going to start focusing on this. We're going to work on connecting more. And then, a month from now, nothing's really changed. 2 months from now, nothing's really changed. How long should it take, right? I think that's where the nuance in this, or the difficulty in this, is that it's not as simple as changing a process and seeing the outcome, right? And that's that feedback loop and that time for results. You can talk about connection results. I don't know. I think there's something that does that trigger.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. And it's funny, okay, we're going to focus on connection is like saying, let's sit down and have a conversation about psychological safety. You're not going to get there. You literally won't. Nobody wants to play that game. And so I think it's taking the decision that you are prepared to hold it as a priority. And if that's the case, you can and you will make 5 minutes at the beginning or the end of a meeting to run some kind of connect before content. I like that phrase. That works really well.
Yeah.
In your meeting. And in the back of my head, I'm saying, okay, let's come up with 5 or 6 that we can put in our show notes. It's going to take me a while, but we'll get them there. Keep an eye on it. And here are the classic connection things that you can do. And you know, you asked me for some earlier, another one's just sprung to mind. Take a dice in to your next team meeting and think of 6 questions that are either fun to answer or connected to the workplace to answer. Have everybody around the table roll the dice, answer the question connected to the number that you roll. And you can play so many different adaptations and variations on that already. That doesn't take a long time. You are not going to go from metric 90 to metric 80 because you rolled a dice around the table. But you are going to find out what everybody's latest Netflix show favorite is. And if yours and mine are the same, we're having a conversation now over coffee discussing the lead role or the drama behind it or something along those lines. And then you get trust, you get reciprocity, you get learning, you get helpfulness, and you're reaping the rewards because you threw a dice for 5 minutes. Like, this isn't a big effort. This is just paying attention to the people around you.
Yeah. And as a leader, if you focus on it, whether you verbalize you're going to focus on it, even making the change and then sticking with that change and being intentional to keep it authentic, ultimately results in it being something that the team focuses on, right? One last question in the chat before we wrap up, because I think it's a good one here that mixes in, well, they're always all good questions. Do you have any tips on how to get a team to connect that has a mix of introverts and extroverts without essentially the extroverts taking over?
Especially face-to-face meetings, they are designed for extroverts to hold stage. So you know the people around you. It depends how big your team is. Sometimes setting people up for success helps. So if you're running something like questions, you could release the questions beforehand. The one I really like, we use this a lot when we're working with bigger groups, is we call it 1, 2, 4. It's the simplest way. So everybody writes their own ideas down first on a post-it note or in their book. Now everybody has something to say, and then share it with the person next to you. So you've got 2s around the room. And then if you are a big group, or even, I suppose 8 would be minimum, 2s become 4s. And then we kind of feedback the fun stuff or the interesting stuff. And what happens there is those who like time to ponder have that moment. A conversation with just 2 people, there are most who can engage in that. By the time you get to the 4, the one from each pair who are happier talking are doing most of the talking, and from the 4, your chatty people are coming back and joining the conversation. There's numerous different ways you can use a talking stick. You can, you know, start safe, and 2-word connections, 2-word check-in that we talked about earlier on, and then just build it slowly. The part to remember is that these kind of exercises, these kind of conversations where we're bringing everyone in, they're exhausting as well for the highly introverted. And so, you know, we're not doing an hour of them, we're doing 5 minutes of them. And, you know, if you notice someone looking particularly uncomfortable or disengaging, there's a really good conversation to have one-on-one later and get to know that person and ask them, because they know. And sitting, I'm probably more ambiverted, I think, you know, there's a lot that I don't know. So get to know the person in front of you, because your point is a good one. One size does not fit all here. Craig, I've lost your volume. I don't know if...
Well, that would be because I muted myself for a second there when I was coughing. So let's wrap her up. Let's move on. Let's close with our big idea for today.
So for those with us this morning, you can see the screen. If you're listening to the podcast version of this, it's okay. I will help you through it. You've no need to see the pictures. They literally are pretty much just nice images behind one or two words. We always finish with one big idea, two things you can do straight away. And Craig's request is 3 questions. And sometimes I have 3, sometimes I have more. I've never had less yet. That might be a one. So our big idea for this week, this episode, is if you want to build engagement, then do exactly that. Go engage your people. Make the time, stop, listen, be a part of what's going on. 2 things that we can do to do that, and this is a bit of a wholesale going on here. So I picked on the see, hear, and valued. We're going to start with hearing. How can we listen, hear people better? And it's important to remember, here's all the things. You're not listening if you're talking. Leaders love talking. So concentrate on your voice share. Are you actually not talking? I love the phrase active silence. Okay, where can you be actively silent and engaged in that conversation? You're not listening to people if you're planning advice. Okay, go for it. Try today. It's Friday. No advice. Don't give anybody any advice today. Just listen. And then you might hear what it actually is that they're trying to solve, because often we're giving the wrong advice. If you're caught in trying to share your fabulous, brilliant story, stop. Let them share their story. This isn't about yours. If you're just trying to listen to reply, you're not listening. If you don't want to be in the conversation, don't be in the conversation. Like if you don't have time to find out how somebody is, don't ask the question. Just say good morning or good afternoon. And if you're stressed as well. So if you are overextended, it is really difficult for you to hear properly. So when we talk about connection and we talk about hearing people, this is a really generous version of listening to the person in front of you. The second, a little bit shorter this time, but it is something that helps in all of these. If you want to move through those phases of group dynamics, or build connection, or actually solidify your engagement, build your recognition. And I am not a fan of the SMART acronym until it is applied to recognition. So you can apply SMART there to your recognition. But when you're valuing people, if you appreciate them, if you acknowledge them, this goes a very long way. And if you dig back in our previous episodes, you'll find out what a power thank you is too. And that is a very impactful way to say thank you. And for those of you who can see the screen, I cheated. I have 3 bullet points, but Craig called me on it already. There are actually 5 questions on there for you to leave the day rumbled in action. So as you move through your Friday, we're going to change it into 4. Like, can you not give any advice today? There's your first question. But who is on your team and are you seeing them? That person that you know nothing about, you haven't seen them. Maybe that's the next person to make a good connection with. That person you don't really like, you don't really know them. You don't have to be best friends, but what else do you need to know? Where today can you employ active silence? That doesn't mean switch off and don't pay attention. It means that you're genuinely and generously listening to the person in front of you. And then if you're a leader here today, what are the conditions that you're setting up for your team? Is it possible to be engaged with the conditions around you? And if you're contributing somewhere, what is it that you need to engage? And have you told your leader? Because if you're not talking about these things, they don't know. And what they don't know, they don't know. There you go. 1, 2, 3. We made it to the end.
There we go. 1, 2, 3, 5. And thank you, Jenny. And folks, again, going to throw the code back into the chat. If you'd love to join us in person in a couple of weeks from now, take advantage of that code. Bring a friend, bring a table. We'd love to have you join us. And Jenny and I will be back in a couple of weeks for one last conversation before a March break. Have a fantastic day. Great weekend. And as always, Jenny, I appreciate you. Thank you. And we'll talk to everybody soon. Take care.
Have a good weekend, everyone.